Just
Bugs?
what? Bugs today.
For what, GDPR?
No, when you added the report table.
What about it?
Oh, indexing and unique whatever
Yeah,
things.
you
Yeah, I
put
saw
in
that.
a unique constraint on a column that should not be unique, and we just now found it.
Oh, shows how much reports have been used.
Yeah. All right, so this episode thing, we're going to try to basically condense 3-hour-long videos into 1 hour. Ready, go.
I think Omar, you go first. You've got the best like idea of what this is supposed to look like.
I go
Okay.
first if you really don't want to. I mean, I don't care.
Yeah, go, Justin.
Okay. So wait, let me readjust all my things here so it looks like I'm actually looking towards the camera here.
Yeah, I feel like I'm never looking towards my camera.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second.
That didn't help at all.
Okay. So I did mine over Telerik and Kendo UI. It was one of the videos on the Microsoft Visual Studio YouTube page. I chose this one because the last time I used Kendo UI, if I'm honest, it was pretty garbage and it was pretty frustrating to use. And it was also being used on a Silverlight project. So all of those things combined made for a really fun experience. And I thought, well, this was 6 years ago, 7 years ago. So why don't I watch the video and see if it's anything, if it's gotten any better.
So I'm not familiar with Kendo at all, so maybe give like a high-level overview.
Telerik, yeah, and I guess I'll kind of touch on that. Telerik is kind of the .NET toolkit that they've come up with. Think of it as kind of like Bootstrap-esque. It's a set of controls that you can add to you add it to your Visual Studio. It becomes part of your toolbox. You can just drag and drop these components directly into your project and and kind of build to the designer and then just rig them up as you would a normal WPF component or whatever it is you're using. Back then it only had a few things. It was like WPF, Silverlight, and then like I don't know, maybe just a few other things. These days their Telerik control covers anything .NET. So the main ones they touched on were .NET Core, any mono projects, any ASP.NET, MVC projects, anything that you can use .NET on. They have a version of Telerik that'll work for that. And on the other half of the coin is the Kendo UI, which is kind of what they coin as their polished web and mobile components. This is a front end JavaScript framework that has controls in Angular, React, Vue, jQuery, whatever JavaScript based thing you can think of. They've tried to create a toolkit around that. So the best way I like to think of it is kind of like Bootstrap. Think of it as just another company's version of Bootstrap, right? So yeah, I'll just kind of touch on the few things they touched on in the video, and then they did a ton of demos, which obviously I won't touch on at all. I will note that one of their demos crashed, which made me realize, okay, it's still kind of the same Telerik that it was.
Is it like Telerik or Kendo UI Core? Did they rename it?
They're still the name, the same thing. They've just continued to add things. They were trying to do a drag and drop example of a list view, and an entire application crashed. And I was like, okay, that's Telerik.
Nice. So it's like a UI editor, almost like when you're creating like a WPF application, it is drag and drop the controls into the canvas. Is that what this is?
Yeah, this is you install this, and then where you would see like, oh man, it's been a little while since I've done this, but where you see your list of like WPF controls, there's like your label and your image and your text box and what have you. There's actually another subsection that is Telerik, and then it'll be like Telerik color picker and Telerik calendar and all these different controls that are themed and supposed to be streamlined, customizable, that you can just drag into your application, and they look really pretty, right? And all the controls are themed generally the same. They all work generally the same, so you get a real common theme throughout your entire application. Okay. So yeah, so these days they cover everything from web, and they pointed out, Ajax, MVC, .NET Core, JSP, PHP, and they even managed to say Silverlight, so they still have that.
What?
They touch mobile applications, so Xamarin, UWP, XAML, and then they have something they call Native Script, which is an open source framework for writing native cross-platform apps using JavaScript. And then they had another one that I guess also tied in with Native Script, which is like an Angular TypeScript combination as well. So I didn't get a chance to look into any of these things, but these are things they say they have. For desktop, they still cover WPF, UWP, and WinForms, and then they've moved on to do all these suites of like reporting and productivity tools, testing applications, and testing studios for writing automation. They have their own form of just mock library for writing the mock-up test applications. And then a really big thing that they touched on was like what they call the conversational UI, which is essentially this framework for writing conversational bots and chat bots. That was the most interesting thing they talked about. It's just kind of this natural conversation flow that they've developed so that you can so you can add that to your website or what have you.
That sounds.
It sounded interesting.
Yeah. Well, what I was gonna say is it sounds a little out of place. The way you're describing it is Telerik's like, or I guess is Telerik's the components, I guess, or like the collection of components, and Kendo is more of the.
Telerik is like from what I gathered, the way
are there two separate things?
Yeah, they're two separate things.
Okay.
Under the same umbrella, Telerik is like the version of the controls that touch the .NET world, and then the Kendo UI is the version of the controls that are JavaScript based web.
I wonder how that works in Xamarin. Is it like in a web view, I guess, or something?
In Xamarin,
because you said
So maybe in like Xamarin Forms controls. That's what I would guess.
Interesting.
So if you're dragging and dropping all these elements to make your web page, are you still able to use like existing JavaScript libraries you might have?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, you're still able to do everything. You could probably retheme these using if you liked how easy the controls were to drag in and say they worked.
So do they support Forms? They support Silverlight. Do they support Windows Forms? So could we go ahead and like add some of these components to like say our Windows Forms application?
Yes. Yes and yes. They have a WinForms version as well.
Interesting. That'd be.
They use this right now on Web Admin. I'm pretty sure the color picker that they've been displaying is a Kendo UI control.
So do you just use it by like pulling in a NuGet package or?
By pulling in, there's probably a Telerik NuGet you can download. I think Telerik costs money to get like the base DLLs for whatever version you're doing, or for and I don't know how it would work for the web version, but let me say this: when I used to have it, free trial. So it actually costs a subscription fee to be allowed to continue to use the Telerik controls.
Be interested to see how we're using it then.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that the Kendo UI control, but it's kind of like once you have the DLLs, if you're not paying the subscription fee, you just can't get the next version that comes out, right? You're stuck at whatever the most recent release you had was.
Right.
So
some company wanted a chatbot in the next version.
Yep.
Microsoft wrote it for them.
Microsoft has a chatbot, but this would be Telerik's version.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of a super speedy description of all the things they have. When I used Telerik, granted it was in the Silverlight world, there were a lot of features in their tools that weren't fleshed out. For instance, there were a couple controls like you couldn't even set the width and height on because they hadn't actually implemented them in the control. And so you had to go really roundabout ways to get certain features to work correctly. Granted, this was 6 or 7 years ago, right? So now I assume most of these controls, and they say like in their MVC projects, they've got 70 plus jQuery based UI widgets. Their .NET application has 1,200 demos. I don't know what good that all does. But the long and short of it is it's supposed to be a framework for a very fluid, commonly themed project for a fee.
Yeah. So if you're wanting like common UI across multiple platforms, basically.
Right. Yeah. And if you want
business logic across multiple.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a test suite that ties in with all of it.
You don't happen to have any like code examples? Because I'm having a hard time like visualizing how this works.
Let me pull up
and you still have like 7 minutes, so if you don't have anything else, we can go to that.
Here, I'm going to pull up a React demo just because that's something I actually like. How do I share the screen?
On the left-hand side, there's a toolbar.
Now, do I share the screen or can I share an individual?
Screen share. Yeah, if you click on it, it'll give you an option for window or application.
Oh, application window, perfect. What is it sharing? Does you see docs and demos?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at charts because those will be the most visually appealing. So this would be a version. This is an example of what I'm sure they still call the Kendo chart. In this case, they have a chart container, which is what they just import. So they must have a set of classes, or I would say components, and like in some React thing that you download via Node or maybe via their website. And then you can actually import each of the containers. And then you simply would put those components into your project to get this visualization to show up. Look at the actual source. Yeah, so they have a chart, series of things you would use on a chart, a definition of a data series, so some name with some data, and then they would build out the actual functional component.
Yeah. So is it possible to see that same chart in something else, like in I don't know, can you easily change platforms for the same component, like for that chart, for example?
Oh, yeah, sure. You want to see the same? Let's see if we can do this.
I just want to see how like it looks from platform to platform.
Yeah. Let's see here. Let's do this one to the charts example, and then let's back up on this one, and let's look at something like, I don't know, let's look at MVC demo and see if they have a chart. It says Chad, not chart. Okay, this line bar chart. So bar charts.
Close enough.
So this is the example of the MVC chart. They have source code down here, definition of a series, some general definition. Here's the name, here's the title, here's the legend, yada yada yada. Looks like this. Here's another bar chart that's a vertical instead of a horizontal. Back to the source code, and some definition of a series. Here's a title, here's a legend, here's a category, here's a series.
Interesting.
So the idea is that you get a similar or exact duplication, based on whichever type of is there a column chart? Oh, there it is. Perfect. There you go. So there's the React version, and there's the MVC version. Exact same data.
Cool.
What was your project 6 years ago that you did?
The original incarnation of Web Admin.
Was that Web Portal?
No, it was called
BBUI? No.
It was called BBUI. Yeah.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
And that was, yeah. So a lot of what's in the initial release of WebAdmin actually still exists in source control from 7 years ago. But it was written in Silverlight, and they abandoned the project because they actually abandoned the project right before Silverlight went belly up, because they didn't think that mom and pop shops, they didn't think they could get it out to enough mom and pop shops, and then Silverlight crashed anyways, and they're like, okay, good, we can abandon this project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Their failure was validated.
It wasn't a failure. I did really good. It actually looked really good.
Yeah, I never heard anyone complain about it, so I think that means you did good, right?
Yeah, you weren't here. Oh, I guess you mean since then?
Yeah.
You never heard anybody bring up like, oh, at least it wasn't as bad as BBUI.
Yeah.
It did look good. I actually did a lot of things that this is totally off topic, but I actually did a lot of things like visual representations of the media that existed in the panel. I had that in BBUI before it ever existed, these days.
Cool.
Okay. So there you go. Anyways, back on topic. I digress. That's the 30,000 foot view of what Telerik and Kendo UI are.
Cool. So is that what the video was mostly about? Just the latest and greatest of Kendo?
Yeah, the video was just like
Telerik.
This is basically as fast as I gave this example. That's how fast they explained all the topics that they cover.
Remember, just had like demos.
And then they just did some demos of some Signal R things that they had rigged up and some chat box things that they had rigged up, stuff like that.
Cool.
Yep. If it works as well as it was intended to work back when I used it, I'm sure it's a wonderful product to use. But like I said, back then it was a bit difficult.
All right, I guess I'll try to go next. So mine was on machine learning video. I don't know where the name of the video is, but it's in the description or whatever. So basically they start off with kind of going over high level what machine learning is and what it helps you do. It basically helps you program the unprogrammable, and it's their words, not mine. So it's how to program a function that takes in, for example, a bunch of images and decides, is there a face in this image or is there not a face in this image? And when you come across this kind of problem, there's not a obvious place where to start with this. Like, how do you start writing that? And what machine learning does, it lets you basically take a data set that's easier to kind of label. There's faces in this image, there's not faces in this image. So you can easily create this data set where you label them, and then you use machine learning to create a model, which then gives you this function basically that you can give it an input like an image, and it'll give you a yes, there's a face in it, or no, there's not a face in it. So that's like the really simple explanation of what machine learning is. You take this kind of difficult problem, that difficult problem to program, and you use machine learning to create this model that takes in some input and gives you some output. Is kind of the high level simplified view of it. After that, they kind of talk about the different tasks in machine learning. So the different tasks in machine learning there's 3 of them that they went over. Is classification, which is this A or is this B? So in my previous example, is there a face in this image? Is there not a face? The second one is regression, which is basically trying to predict a number, like how much or how many. So what's the temperature going to be tomorrow, or what's the price of a t-shirt in the image? So that's regression. Third one's clustering. So it's how is this data organized? What are the groups that all the stuff in this data like how can you group things basically. So like if you have a bunch of news articles, how do you group the news articles into different topics?
If you have a bunch of sales data, how do you group people into types of buyers?
Right, that's another one. So that would be clustering. So after that, that's the beginning of the video basically. And then they have in a about machinelearning.net. Oh, so that's the name of the, or part of the name of the video is ml.net, which is basically Microsoft's machine learning framework. They just released it back in Build, which was a few months ago in May. It was one of their big conferences. Although it was just released a few months ago, it was heavily used internally for like the past decade, is what they said. Like it was actually used in Bing, Bing's ad prediction, Excel's chart recommendation, PowerPoint design ideas, Windows 10 Defender, and a bunch of other products internally. There's already been 4 versions since they released it, although they haven't, I don't think they didn't say it in the video, but I don't think they've had like a 1.0 release. Like it's right now they're at 0.5 or something, 0.5, whatever. So I'm guessing they're building to like an official main release. But they didn't say it explicitly in the video, or maybe I missed it. So ML.net basically gives you tools to build your own machine learning models, train them, and consume them, is the gist of ML.net. It's open source, and it's on GitHub. They have the whole source code up there, and they also have a separate repository with a bunch of examples, like a bunch of example projects. So what the framework actually gives you, it gives you an API to do training and consumption. So you can use the training or the API to basically either train your model or to just use someone else's model that someone else built and feed it inputs and get a prediction or get an output. They also give you transforms, which that's kind of just, I guess, a machine learning definition, which is essentially data pre-processing. So it's just taking like a plain text file and converting it into something a little bit more readable by the algorithms that actually create the models. So like, I guess I'll get into that in one of the examples that they have below. Basically take text and turn it into like numbers that the algorithm knows how to use, or values that the algorithm knows how to use. Another thing that they give you in the framework is something called learners, which is, again, like a definition in machine learning for the set of classical machine learning algorithms. And they give you a couple. So there's like 5 or 6 different learners that they give you out of the box.
Which ones do they give you?
The ones I have listed are linear, boosted trees, SVM, k-means, and I'm guessing they have more because those are the ones they have listed that they said whenever they were talking about that. But in one of the examples, they use something called a factorization machine. So yeah, they give you a pretty good handful of algorithms out of the box. And then they just recently have added some extensions so that you could use TensorFlow and other machine language frameworks. And there's also an example of using TensorFlow, one of the examples I have below. Then they kind of show what they had before this, or what Microsoft offered before this. They have what's called Azure Cognitive Services. I don't know if y'all have heard of that. Actually, I think Jack, you've used this before, haven't you, for the text, or not text, the speech recognition?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, there's this thing called Azure Cognitive Services where essentially Azure or the cloud holds all the model and everything, and you just you new up basically an instance of the model. You give it some input, like say a picture, and it tells you there's a face or not a face in it, depending on what service you're using. I think the example that they use is getting sentiment on like product reviews. So they give it like a comment from a product review, and it gives you a sentiment reading on it saying this is 96% good or 5% good, meaning the customer was unhappy with it. And they were trying to make a point with that, because one of the example, or whenever they were demoing that, I guess, one of the messages or product reviews that they gave the cognitive service was on a vacuum cleaner. The comment was, "This vacuum cleaner sucks so much dirt." And the service actually said it was a negative sentiment, which really it's not a negative sentiment. It's just probably because it has the word "sucks" in there. It thinks it's a negative sentiment.
Yeah. Okay, 99%.
Yeah. It thinks it's a negative sentiment.
It's a negative comment unless you give it the context of a vacuum cleaner, and that's a whole other problem. Like, what is the product? I have to understand what this product is now.
So that's kind of the point they were trying to make, is like if you have something, or you have a need to make your machine learning or your AI basically more customized to you, then use ML.net to train your model. Because these cognitive services that Azure provides, they're good, but to a certain extent, if you want to train them and customize them to your specific needs, you're going to want to do something with ML.net.
So when you're training, I was wondering, so if you're wanting to figure out whether an image has a face in it, I mean, you can't just pass it like the bits or the bytes of the file. You have to perform some sort of algorithm, like on the image. You have to look for patterns of pixels, maybe detect edges and colors, shadows. Does ML.net offer that, or you said?
Yeah, it's in one of the examples below. It's image classification.
Okay.
That's actually the last example. If you want, we'll skip straight to that. It doesn't matter the example.
No, that's fine. I was just wondering if it just did like the algebraic portion of machine learning, or if it also did like the.
I can't completely answer that because I don't know. The one example that they did with images was the image classification and deep learning. But the way they did it was they were using the TensorFlow extension that they just added.
Right.
So there's tons of TensorFlow models already out there that people have like trained and made really good and made available to people. So there's this one called, the one that they use in the example, it's called Inception, which it's a model to classify images. So it tells you there's a cat in this picture, there's a golden retriever in this picture. So what they did is using ML.net, it was actually surprisingly simple. Like all they did is basically load in this TensorFlow model, which is just a file that you can download. They load it into this object, a specific ML.net object. Let me back up a little bit. All you have to do to use this, like you can just create a console application and add the NuGet package for ML.net. And that's all you have to do to start using this. So going back to this example, you just new up this object to, or this utility to load in the TensorFlow model, and then you basically load in the image that you're going to want to classify. You can do some, I think in the example, they do some manipulation on it. They like resize it and only grab certain pixels that they want off the image. So I don't know if that answers your question, but they did offer that where you could like resize the image and grab a certain part of the picture. And then they feed that to the model and it gives back a classification of what's in the picture.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's that example. That's the image classification and deep learning. That's using TensorFlow, and it's actually something fairly new that they just added in the past 1 or 2 releases. Did that somewhat answer your question?
Yeah. So it does sound like they're leaning on TensorFlow to do maybe the image processing, and then they're providing a real simple way to just use that TensorFlow model.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're doing the image process. You're doing the input image processing. So like if you were to send me a picture or upload a picture to my service and say classify this or tell me what's in it, I would actually take that image and resize it and grab a part of the picture that I'm concerned with and pass it to the model.
Okay.
The model, it's a static model, I think is the way they put it. TensorFlow, it's like it's a thing in TensorFlow. It's called a static model where they've already trained it. It doesn't change. They just give you the file and you load it in and give it an input. It gives you an output.
Okay, and I think you could train a new model using TensorFlow, but is that right?
Yeah, and that was one of the things they're saying. Right now, they don't have the tools in place to like train a TensorFlow model, but you can still continue to train that model using Python or F# or R or whatever you're doing your model creation in.
And it's the model that's all that stuff that you can't actually program. Like they've programmed the unprogrammable, and it's just all this almost like seemingly nonsensical data in this file, right?
Yeah, the model I'm not clear on. This is like my intro to machine learning.
Okay.
I don't have a very good understanding of what that model really consists of. Yeah.
As far as image is concerned, I'd have no idea.
What's that?
As far as like an image based, like if you're trying to build a model that tells you whether there's a smiley face in the picture or not, that model would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I feel like
any model would be interesting to see at this point because
I mean,
fairly new to this. I don't know what I'm guessing the model is just like values that TensorFlow
it's the
knows.
values that suggest it to a certain percentage that this thing is going to be what you think it's going to be. It's like I wish I could remember my machine learning class better. I feel like it's a subset of values that essentially, to like 96% certainty, these are smiley faces.
Yeah.
These are the certain characteristics of this image that make it a smiley face.
Yeah. All right, so I'll go over the other 2 examples that they did real quick. It's the first one was GitHub issue classification. So basically, someone enters a new issue in GitHub, and you want to automatically label it saying what area of the code it's in. So they're actually using this right now in CoreFX on GitHub. CoreFX is one of the repositories they have. And if someone enters an issue, the example they had was WebSocket client throwing some exception, blah, blah, blah. As soon as they submit that, this model takes that and spits out a tag saying area system.net. So the system.net namespace, that's the area that this bug is probably resides in because web client or the socket web client is in the system.net namespace because that's where all the web client stuff's in. So that's the high level of what this problem is trying to solve. And the example they did in the video, they basically showed you how to, well, they didn't show you how to, but they had basically a plain text file with a history of issues in the repository, and it had like the title, the description, and the area and all the labels on it, the tags on it. And then so with ml.net, you load in this plain text file, you you add what's called transforms, I think. What is it called? Transforms? Okay, let me back up. You create this pipeline object, and that pipeline object, you load in that plain text file, and then you tell it what to expect, like on each line, what to expect, how to parse it, basically, telling it that it's going to have a title, a description, and a label. And then you tell it what you want the features to be. This is another machine learning definition, I guess, is the features is what is like the inputs to the model. So in this case, it would be the title and description and tag. And then what was it? The label is what it's what it's trying to tie it to. So the end result is you have this model that you can pass in a title and description, and it gives you a area label. So it tells you what area of the code that title and description goes with. And so the demo is basically showing you how to write the code to do that.
You have to have a really big set of
issues
that you've already done for that to work well.
Yeah, you'd have to have tagged a lot of issues, which I don't know. In some of those big projects, they're pretty good about tagging stuff. Like we might be able to do it with our, at least when we were in TFS, I feel like we were pretty good about tagging stuff, like the work items, or QA was, not developers.
We were good about putting a tag or some tags, but
yeah,
we weren't consistent in putting the right tag on everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? It's false positives, false negatives, which you're definitely gonna get.
Yeah, and so also whenever you're creating this model, you do have a ability to, I forgot what they call it, but basically evaluate the model is what they call it, which is basically just testing the model. So you have another data set separate from the input data set that you're training it on, that you can then, once you have a model, test it, saying like, hey, give me the area of this title and description, and then it gives you the wrong area, so you're like, nope. And you basically, and if it's a bad grade, then you have to retrain it.
Usually you use 10% of your data set. So if you have 1,000 issues, then you would just call off the first 100 and you would call that your test set. And then you would feed it the other 900 as your training set, so that it would go through and learn off those 900, and then you would revert back to the 100 to test it against. And you would already know the labels for those 100, but you wouldn't tell the algorithm what those labels are.
Yeah. See, that sounds like a pro tip. They didn't say that in the video.
So you would run the test against those 100 that you already know the labels to, and then when it determines what it thinks the labels are, you would go back and run a comparison on the labels it generated versus the labels that you already knew, and that's how you get your percentage of correctness based on your model. Is if it gets 99 out of 100 right, it's probably doing a pretty good job. Yeah. And there's another thing in machine learning called k-folds, which is where you use the same 1,000 inputs, but it does the k-folding technique is it would use the first 100 as a test set and the next 900 as the model. It would run it, and then it would move up one by making the second 100 the test set and then running it on the other 900. And so it folds through the test set 100 at a time, constantly running against itself, and then it tunes itself using the folding algorithm so that you're supposed to get your best odds doing what's called k-folds.
That sounds cool. Yeah, so I think I just ran out of time, but the other example was Movie Recommender, which was kind of like a poor man's Netflix. And they just go over the different types of learning algorithms that they have, and the one that they have available for you is called factorization machines. It's a binary classification learner, and all that really means is it gives you a yes or no back from the model. So like, is this a good movie to show X user, yes or no, versus a percentage like you would on some of the other learners. All right, Jack, you can go now.
All right. So I was also watching a video off the Visual Studio YouTube channel, and this one was talking about Blazor.
Oh, cool.
And so they said they called it Blazor. It's a combination of browser plus Razor, and so I guess I'll get into Razor for a little bit. Razor is a syntax. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I've never been exposed to this stuff before, but Razor is a syntax for like .NET templating in for web pages. Um, so a templating engine would be you've got kind of a pseudo HTML file on the server, and you can inject some values and variables. You can perform some logic on the server before shipping that web page to the browser. And so you could change stuff like a title that says "Hello user." If Omar is logged in, it would say "Hello Omar," and the Omar value would get set on the server. Um, and so what Blazor does or offers is it lets you use the Razor syntax um, to run kind of dynamic code once the page has already been put on the browser. So it's kind of like a replacement for JavaScript. It's using WebAssembly. So it's my understanding if you can compile anything to WebAssembly, you could do C#, Python, whatever languages are out there. They just need to get compiled into WebAssembly. Um, it uses .NET Core. I guess that's nice. There are some projects available, like some sample setup projects available in Visual Studio. There's a standalone Blazor. It's just the client side of it. So like your, I don't want to say Angular because I don't know about Angular, but it would just be your client side code. And so what's kind of cool about just your client side code is you could take these files, you could put them on any server, and that server does not need to have .NET installed whatsoever. Those files just get shipped to the browser, and the browser runs the .NET code. So if you want to have a Linux server and you don't want to install .NET Core or ASP.NET, you can. The server is just going to ship all the files that the browser needs, and the browser will take care of the rest.
Yeah, so it's kind of like if you want to put it like on, how GitHub IO offers those static web pages where you can just put HTML and JavaScript out there and it handles it for you. You don't even have to have a server.
Yeah.
You can basically run that version, the client Blazor on that. You just you basically have GitHub host the DLLs in HTML and JavaScript, and it runs it all in the browser.
Yeah. The presenter, Daniel, he was saying that this is still pretty experimental, early stages, not ready for any large entity to start using. The actual amount of data that's getting downloaded by the browser, so that all your dependencies, and then your actual custom code that you've written, it was almost 2 megabytes worth of data. I think that's very small for a .NET application, but that's pretty large for a web application. And so he was saying that one of their goals is to get that amount of data somehow compressed down to 1 megabyte. He was talking about maybe there'd be some browser caching, so you don't need to download like those generic system libraries every time. In part of his demonstration, he did go into, I think he had Chrome open, and he went into the network tab, and you could see all these DLL files get downloaded. And once he did that, he demonstrated debugging in the browser. Let me see if I can. I'm not going to debug, but I'm just trying to figure out what tab he opened to do that.
Debug like in Developer Console?
Yeah. I think maybe he launched the debugger from Visual Studio, and that just brought up a second page for him in the browser. But you could see all the DLLs that were loaded in the browser. You could double click a DLL and see the code just as you'd written it in your IDE. You could set breakpoints. So he set a breakpoint on a button click that was written in .NET.
That's interesting. So you're saying he clicked on a DLL and it showed like an if statement as if with like the names and everything, the way you wrote it in your editor.
Yeah, it had all of your line breaks, your spacing, your tabs, whatever. Like it looked like it looked like the code as it would appear in your Visual Studio.
That's impressive. That must be new because I used Blazor a little bit, like a month ago. I was telling you earlier, and you couldn't even run it in debugger mode using the full web server version where you're running ASP.NET Core on the back end, like through Visual Studio. If you hit F5, that wasn't working at the time. You had to actually publish in order to run the code.
Didn't we do a Future Friday project using Blazor?
Yeah, I'm still working on it.
Okay, that was
nice.
He did say it was still pretty buggy. So when he first tried to do the debugging, an error had appeared saying like the debugging failed. I think there was maybe a WebSocket exception. But for some reason, clearing his cache and local storage resolved that issue. I think his exact words were, "Oh, this bug is happening again." So they're still working on that. But yeah, he set a breakpoint on a button click, and then he went back to the Blazor page and he clicked on the button, and the code stopped and the breakpoint. I mean, he was just sitting there at the breakpoint. He had also said that, I mean, it's kind of just a proof of concept now, the debugging. He was saying that stepping still doesn't really work reliably. Locals, like looking at your local values in the code, is not implemented whatsoever, but they are going to work on that. I went over, you can host these as static files, so the server doesn't need to have .NET, but there are some starter projects available in Visual Studio that do offer the whole, you got the Blazor client, you can have an ASP.NET server, and if you use that project, if you create a new project using that template in Visual Studio, it also adds a shared project, and so you've got your client, server, and shared projects, and you can use code from the shared project in either of your applications. So he was saying that while you don't need to have .NET installed, there is that added benefit that you can share code between the server and the client. Another part of the demonstration was showing how you could still continue to use your existing JavaScript libraries. You could also call on JavaScript from within Blazor. His example was somebody had created, I think this is right. I think somebody in the community had created a library to call I'm going to back up on that. Anyway, the demonstration was it was a JavaScript pop-up. He clicked on a button. The button was coded in Blazor. He clicked on the button and a JavaScript pop-up appeared. There was a text input in the pop-up. He entered some value. He clicked OK, and then that value showed up back on the web page. And so there is Blazor to JavaScript communication, and there's also JavaScript back to Blazor communication. That was
there's like full JavaScript interrupt out there.
I actually still have 15 minutes left of this video to watch. I was finding bugs all day, so I didn't get to finish it.
Blazor's interesting. I think it was definitely the first time I saw it. I thought I was trying to do a project with it like ASAP because I was having a good time with it. It's very like React, but for your Razor files, or like not as dangerous as Angular can be.
React kind of for your Razor files.
Yeah, that's the way. That's kind of the way I think about it. And both of them are
because of the components and all that.
Yeah, you're like writing components. You're writing.
Oh, you started this Future Friday project with me.
Yeah, I said that.
Where have you been? Where have you been on Future Fridays?
No, we started that project. You were going to do Blazor.
Yeah, we're still on that iteration of Future Friday. We're still working on it.
I don't remember what project you're working on, to be honest. That was last Future Friday.
Yeah, but we're still on that feature Friday because we didn't finish it.
Since then, I've proposed a machine learning one that was about the most recent one I proposed was trying to.
Maybe I'm all by myself.
I think because I told you I wasn't going to work on that. I had a different idea, which was the machine learning. I wanted to write a machine learning project
for baseball.
Oh, that's right.
They could try to break the record for number of hits in a row by guessing which batter was going to get a hit on a singular day.
Because sports gambling is now legal.
Is it?
I thought at the time that was like in the media.
Oh, that wasn't why. I just wanted to beat the record. No one's ever been able to guess 56 in a row, so I wanted to try.
Yeah, I forgot that in the demonstration, this guy had went over the components. Seemed pretty cool. You could have components within components.
Yeah, so I think it's really cool that you're like the whole concept of Blazor, that it's basically no JavaScript if you really want to. Like no JavaScript at all. It's not like Silverlight or some other solutions that have come out in the past. Like, so Silverlight was you had to have a plugin. The user had to have a plugin. WebAssembly is actually supported by all the major browsers right now. And then there was solutions back there's been solutions at least to transpile like C# code or Python or pick your favorite language into JavaScript, like TypeScript for instance, transpiling TypeScript into JavaScript, which you still get JavaScript as your end result. Whereas with Blazor, you're actually running C# code, and you're running the .NET runtime in WebAssembly, which is in turn running your C# code.
Yeah, he was saying that it uses mono.
Yeah.
There is, I think, like 1 or 2 lines of JavaScript necessary, and all that does is bootstrap your project. But you don't have to write that. You're like you said, you're not writing the JavaScript, but like 2 lines of JavaScript are necessary to get it working.
Yeah, but that's basically like a check, like is WebAssembly actually available or implemented in this browser, and then start up the .NET runtime essentially.
Yeah.
And if WebAssembly isn't supported, then it falls back to a mono implementation in JavaScript, which that shouldn't happen unless you're on some weird browser.
That could happen.
Yeah. And so a little bit of history, I guess, on the runtime, which is kind of interesting, is it was actually just some guy that decided to implement the runtime. It wasn't mono, actually. It was another implementation of the runtime. Can't remember what it's called. But anyways, he implemented that in WebAssembly, and then they turned to mono. And like you said, this is still like in the very early stages. And I think not too long ago, they were talking about they're still not even 100% sure that this is the route that they want to go, where the runtime is implemented in WebAssembly and you run the DLLs in the browser, which the other way to do it would be to have a compiler that compiles your C# into WebAssembly. Which I don't know.
If you do it that way, you would still, the end result would still be static files that you could put wherever you want, right? Like you were saying, the GitHub pages.
I think so. Okay. You would just, I feel like you might lose some of the .NET stuff.
Would you be able to debug?
I'm sure you could find a way to, but you lose, you're basically not, it's C#, but it's not, because C# runs in the runtime, in the .NET runtime, and if you're compiling the C# into WebAssembly, it's now a static file that the browser is executing, not the runtime, the .NET runtime.
I see.
Yeah. which I feel like they've probably abandoned that, but I'm pretty sure there was talk about that's still an option or a valid option.
I mean, this video came out September 14th, so like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they're still chugging along with this option.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's been the option since I started using it too. It was like, what, 2 or 3 months ago?
They've already got a cool name for it.
Blazor.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. We did it in an hour.
Yay. Machine learning in 20 minutes. Very impressive.
We're all machine learning experts now.
I think training is probably the hardest part of that.
No, writing the method is the hardest part.
Writing the method?
Training is training. You just give it.
Like writing the training algorithm. Like if you're using...
That's writing the method. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Writing the thing that knows how to discover there's a face in a picture.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. And then feeding it data to learn. That's the easy part.
So to me, the whole thing was like, there's a bunch of tools like the top and the bottom. So there's the like data transformation and making it ready for the algorithm, and then there's the using of the model or whatever. The real meat of it to me was like the learning algorithm. Like there's just basically one line that's the most difficult part. That algorithm, that is the machine learning, I would think. Yeah, like the other parts is just getting you ready to feed it to the algorithm, and then after that is using the model. That algorithm part, like the actual
what you want it to do.
Yeah, that's
I feel like these days most of the algorithms, not most algorithms, most everything you could want to do, or a significant portion of things you could want a machine learning algorithm to do, there's probably already a method that exists for
yeah, there's already algorithms out there that
data.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so like Jack said, right now probably the hardest part for the main or the most popular AI problems is just training. Like you're gonna have to constantly train and make your model better and better.
Yeah, and you can overtrain. That's a real term. That's a real machine learning terminology. Specific set of characteristics, and then when you feed it something that doesn't even have those characteristics, it starts to fail significantly. So I guess an algorithm for everything already exists, but the better you can write the next algorithm that does the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe that could be the next topic, is just machine learning. I feel like that would easily take up an hour.
Yeah, machine learning is a lot.
Yeah.
There's another thing too that you touched on.
We could do a like live coding of. No, that might take a long time because once you hit run and train, that takes a while to execute.
Yeah, in 1 hour.
And it's super boring to write a machine learning. It's like,
oh, it's 50% done.
Going on, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you test it and it gets like 42% right. And you're like, crap, now we get to start over.
Yeah.
What was it? Image processing. Yeah, you talked about that, because that's another portion of that is like the image processing that has to occur to discover the smiley face in an image, and has to like bring that smiley face forward. That's a whole nother graduate level topic. It's just digital image processing, and then to tie that in with machine learning, boy, that's a fat paycheck for the guy that does that job.
I wonder how many of these algorithms are coming out of the academic domain versus from software engineers. Like if you have somebody with an actual PhD who just knows how to code, like are all these algorithms coming out of colleges or companies?
I would expect there to be a higher rate out of companies. I would think there would be a lot of papers written by academics that propose an idea of how to do a better set of image processing, and here are the mathematic formulas. But turning those into suites of machine learning algorithms, I feel like that's PhDs that work for the big boys.
Okay.
And then they write a paper about it afterwards.
Yeah.
And then you don't hear about it for 10 years after it already existed.
True. All right, I think we're done.
I'm gonna go have dinner.